I was one of the people who lobbied hard for Australia's pioneering plain tobacco packs. Since they've been introduced, smoking has continued to decline, and already 9 other countries are showing strong interest in following us. But 12.8% of Australians over 14 still smoke, and every day I'm being asked, so what's next in tobacco control? Well, today I'm going to tell you. I'm a regular drug user, and I live with another. Every morning for the last 15 years, I've taken a drug to manage high blood pressure, something that 1 in 5 Australian adults has got. My wife takes cholesterol medication. We get our supplies from our dealer in a shop near our house, but we can get the stuff pretty much anywhere. Our drug dealer, who's a pharmacist, has a 4-year university degree. He won't give us our stash unless we hand over a special licence we need to get from another person. The person who issues me with my drug user's licence is also highly qualified with a degree and lots of postgraduate training. She's a doctor, and the licence I get from her is called a prescription. It's a temporary licence to use a drug that will reduce my chances of having a stroke. It allows me to get a limited supply, usually 3 months. If I want more, I have to start the whole thing over again. I have to visit my doctor, get assessed to see if I should still be using it, pay money to the doctor, get a temporary licence for another limited supply, visit the chemist, pay him more money, and then off we go. If the chemist handed over my prescribed drugs without getting the prescription off me, he could lose his registration. And if he did this repeatedly, he might even be heavily fined or even jailed. Every person listening to me now has had one of these drug licenses. More than half of you are probably licensed drug users right now for contraception, cholesterol control, strong pain relief, or avoiding malaria on your next tropical holiday. It's the same in every country the world over, except for chaotic and often corrupt nations where you can get prescribed drugs over the counter. It's been this way for decades, and nearly everyone thinks it's a very sensible way of regulating the supply of potent medicines to people. It reduces the potential for misuse and for adverse drug interactions. It ensures that long-term use is supervised to monitor any problems that arise, so that the dose can be adjusted or the drug stopped when it's no longer necessary. Now, you don't hear people complaining that this system is a huge erosion of freedom. You don't hear people saying that it's onerous, demeaning, or stigmatising to have to get approval to access these drugs, or to have to get a licence that labels you as having a health problem in the government's central register of drug users called the Therapeutic Goods Administration. You don't hear people call the system that ensures that drugs work and are safe and limits your access to them, as I've described, a great illustration of the dreaded nanny state. Now, we do all this for products which promote health, which prevent disease, which reduce severe pain. We do it for products which are good for us and which might save our lives. So let's now compare how we regulate the sale of a highly addictive product that is the most deadly mass-produced and used product in history. Cigarettes killed about 100 million people last century, and they are on track to kill 1 billion this century. Most of this will occur in low and middle-income countries and be concentrated in poorly educated, mainly male smokers, because smoking by women in most low-income countries remains very low. Now, here's news. All of us are going to die from something. We can't prevent death. But tobacco kills half its long-term users, on average 12 years earlier than normal life expectancy. It takes about 5 minutes to smoke a cigarette, and a 20-a-day smoker smokes 7,305 cigarettes a year. The average smoker takes 12 puffs per cigarette. There's one for pub trivia. So a packet a day smoker bastes the pink linings of their mouth, throat and lungs 87,600 times a year at point blank range, pulling the smoke with its toxic fine particles and carcinogens deep down into the lungs. A person who starts smoking at 16 does that over 2.1 million times by the time they turn just 40. Lung cancer was a rare disease in the early part of last century, but today it's by far the leading cause of cancer death thanks to smoking. Successful tobacco control has seen lung cancer rates falling since the early 1980s, but we still have a huge distance to travel. So how would most smokers feel about needing a licence to buy cigarettes? What if we were to apply the sensible, near universal licensing rules we have for prescribed drugs to the supply of tobacco to people who want to smoke? What would happen if we treated tobacco not as an unremarkable item of commerce, able to be sold in any quantity to anyone who wants it, from any retailer who wants to sell it, but as an unsurpassed agent of disease that began killing people en masse from about 1930? Well, here's how it could work. Let me run through it, and then I'll deal with all the objections that I'm sure have already jumped into your head. First, most smokers would not riot in the streets. Many would in fact welcome it. In Australia today, just 12.8% of adults smoke every day. And each year, about 40% of these make a serious but usually unsuccessful attempt to quit. And we know from a 4-country study of smokers that included Australia that about 90% of smokers regret ever having started. So 90% of 12.8% leaves just 1.2% of adults who we might call contented, leave me alone, I love it, happy smokers. Most of the rest actually support policies designed to help them quit or smoke less. Most smokers support tobacco tax rises. They support smoking bans in workplaces and restaurants and bars. And they support plain packaging. 85% of Australian smokers even ban smoking inside their own homes. There's no other product where so many loyal daily users are in fact so disloyal to it. No other product has so many reluctant, regretful customers. 9 out of 10 people who sometimes drink too much are not planning to stop drinking altogether. And I've never met a smoker who wanted their kids to smoke. So this is how it would work. There would be a commencement date named, set at a few years away. Any adult who wanted to be able to buy tobacco would then apply over the internet for a smoker's licence. You'd supply age authenticating details like a driver's licence or passport number to stop anyone obtaining multiple licences. You'd upload a photo, you'd get a swipeable smart card licence back in the mail, which would be needed to buy cigarettes at every purchase. Tourists could get a temporary licence on entry at the airport, just as they now get a local SIM card. The licensing scheme has 2 key features that make it so much more than a regulator's picnic. The first is that everyone applying for a licence would have to make a decision to pre-commit to how many cigarettes or cigarette equivalents in roll your own tobacco they'd want to smoke on an average day. There would be 3 bands, 1 to 10 cigarettes, 11 to 20, and 20 to 40. Only a tiny proportion of smokers smoke over 40 a day. The need to get a licence would be a straw that breaks the camel's back for some. They'd think, look, I don't want to smoke. If I decide not to get the licence, I won't be easily able to buy cigarettes. Maybe I'll now give up smoking, give it a miss. Others, though, would use the pre-commitment decision to lower the limit on how much they smoked. So smokers would enter a shop, ask for their brand, and swipe their licence, which would tell the store owner instantly if the smoker had already reached their weekly pre-commitment number of cigarettes or could buy more. Every sale would be automatically reconciled with a licensee who purchased it, so a tobacconist would have to account for any stock that came in and was not sold to a licensed smoker. There would also be a licence price incentive to pre-commit to a lower daily maximum. So the annual cost of a 21 to 40 a day licence would be considerably more than a 1 to 10 a day licence. The second main feature of the scheme would be that all licence fees paid by a smoker would be fully redeemable with interest if a smoker decided to surrender their licence permanently before the age of 40. We know from large epidemiological studies that smokers who quit by middle age can avoid much of the excess risk of disease and death that they have over people who've never smoked. So having a financial incentive to do that could be very important. If a 21 to 40 a day licence costs $200 a year, that's about 50 cents a day, or the current cost of half a premium cigarette in Australia today, then a person who quit at 40 after getting their licence at 18 would get 22 years compound interest on their $4,400 if they quit. This would all be automatically calculated, just like banks do all the time. At any time, smokers could look online and see how much cash they could get if they relinquished their licence. Now, what about people turning 18, which is the legal age which cigarettes can be bought? Here we'd have an extra hurdle. Just as when you apply for a driving licence and have to study a thick book on road rules and know things like braking distances at different speeds to pass a knowledge test, so too would new commencing smokers have to pass a test to show that they were knowingly taking the risks of smoking before they could purchase. It's widely said that everyone knows the risks of smoking, but in fact, what most people know is only very superficial top-line information. Again, this barrier, along with the annual upfront licence cost, would probably dissuade many from starting to smoke. So let's turn to possible problems with all of this. First, wouldn't this only encourage a black market? Well, not really. As obtaining a licence would be neither difficult nor very expensive compared to the cost of smoking itself, there would be very few reasons why most current smokers intending to continue would not obtain one. A licence would enable easy access to tobacco purchasing, whereas those without a licence would need to take trouble to find illegal sources of supply. Here, some would argue that illicit drug trade flourishes in most nations, and in spite of such drugs needing to be sourced from criminals. The implication here is that many smokers would similarly be willing to transact with criminals. But this analogy is badly flawed, because while illicit drugs can only be sourced illegally, tobacco would still be readily obtainable legally. It's therefore difficult to see why significant proportions of smokers would elect to source their tobacco underground, dealing with criminals simply because of an easily obtained licensing requirement. With a licensee being only able to buy a maximum of 40 a day, this would be insufficient to stimulate significant third-party purchasing schemes. There would be just not enough profit incentive involved. The main explanations for high demand for illicit tobacco are the cheaper price at which illicit tobacco sells, the ease of cross-border traffic in some nations, and the high levels of corruption in which illegal tobacco trade can flourish. None of these factors would be in any way influenced by a user licensing system, and so are not arguments against licensing. Next, wouldn't it be horrendously expensive to set it all up? Well, here, the costs of the scheme would include staff costs to process the licence applications, the renewals and licence surrender refunds, although much of this could be done online or automatically. Publicity costs to inform smokers about the scheme, and retail swipe card terminals. Well, the cost of the scheme would in fact be drawn from the licensing fees, with retailers paying all costs associated with the swipe card terminals. lost cards would incur a replacement charge. As I've explained, the accumulated licence fees would all be refundable to smokers wanting to surrender their licences, but not all smokers would surrender their licence by the final age limit specified for surrender and refund. That's 40 years. This would leave a large pool of funds that could be used to administer the scheme. And what about young smokers with profound mental health or intellectual disabilities? They would be unable to pass the licensing test. Such people would be likely to be under care or on disability pension. Special provision could be made for another adult or carer to obtain a licence on their behalf after consideration of their circumstances. And finally, wouldn't such a scheme only serve to stigmatise smokers even more? Now, every current smoker's experience has been that tobacco products have always been sold alongside other unrestricted commodities like confectionery, newspapers and magazines. This has powerfully conditioned the view that cigarettes are just ordinary commodities and that a proposal like this is self-evidently draconian. Some smokers may feel that they're being treated like registered addicts and that the licence epitomises their stigmatisation. Such understandable reactions reflect decades of smoking being considered normal. Open sale of tobacco is consonant with the lack of understanding of tobacco's harmfulness when cigarettes became a mass-distributed and advertised commodity at the start of last century. But today's smokers have all experienced a range of profound changes in the way that smoking and cigarettes are socially perceived and regulated. Having to go outside to smoke in now virtually any indoor public setting, having disturbing graphic warnings on otherwise plain packs, and regular exposure to public awareness campaigns about smoking have all coalesced to drive smoking lower and to stimulate most smokers to make quit attempts and to regret having started. The requirement to have a prescription, a temporary licence, to obtain pharmaceuticals is never decried as stigmatising or insulting. When I started working in tobacco control in the mid-1970s, tobacco advertising was everywhere. All major sport was sponsored by tobacco. You could smoke everywhere except in cinemas. Packs had warnings so small you needed a magnifying glass to read them. Now all of this is long gone, but all of it was said to be impossible to change. Well, it wasn't. Most of it took time to play out from being seen as just nuts to being seen as totally normal. Tobacco-caused disease has changed too. 178 nations have signed the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and an increasing number are seeing their tobacco-caused disease rates falling. We can make smoking history. Licensing might be a great way to turbocharge the speed at which it all happens. Thanks.